I'm Victoria Doherty, and this is Love at First Write. This is my vlog. I think it's the fourth or fifth in the series. My vlog that is detailing, following my endeavors to write a great epic romance series. For those of you who have not seen any of my other vlogs, I'll give you just a snapshot of who I am. I am actually a Cold War thriller writer who writes these historical spy thrillers, and so it may seem a bit of a departure writing, this epic romance, but it's actually not the departure that it may seem. I mean, for one thing, I am going to have all of these historical elements in my romance, but also all of my usual themes will be there, and I write about lovers, killers, curses, and destinies. So it's pretty serious stuff. And right now, I have just finished the first draft of the first book in my series, and I am in the editing process, which is why we're going to be talking about humor today. Because in my personal process as a writer, one of the things that the editing process does for me is sprinkle magic throughout the manuscript, apart from tying up loose ends and figuring out inconsistencies and that, which of course is hugely important. But often humor tends to make itself known in my subsequent edits, and I tend to sort of lift it up, and I tend to give my characters a greater sense of humor as we go further down this road of writing, working on draft after draft. And because of that, I've been thinking about why humor is so important and how what it serves and how it serves the reader. I personally think that particularly when one is writing a series and you're asking a reader to stick with you for several books, humor goes a very long way to bringing your reader closer to your characters, closer to the story, in the same way that I think humor does that for us in our own lives. I mean, humor bonds friendships. It creates a family culture in your immediate family. I mean, all the in jokes that you might have with your siblings or your parents. It is, for me, especially, it's a huge part of dating, of being charmed by and charming my husband. We connected, we bonded with our senses of humor. And similarly, I think even when your characters are going through incredibly tough times, and in my story, uh, my characters go through horrific times. I mean, really terrible, terrible things happen to them. And I think that it is so important to balance a story with their own internal resilience. And I think that resilience often comes with a sense of humor, that humor is a huge part of getting us through the worst of times, through death, through injury or illness, through heartbreak. And without it, we are the poorer for it. And without it, our stories are the poorer for it. Just to give a couple of examples, two of my favorite examples, I think the master of this is Raymond Chandler. Raymond Chandler writes these incredibly gritty stories about these underworld characters who actually live these very depressing lives. But there's this strain of humor through it that I think is so compelling. I mean, there's this one line just came to my mind, and I know I'm going to butcher it, so I apologize in advance. But he says, from 30 feet away, she looked like a lot of class, but close up, she looked like she needed to be viewed from 30 feet away, which is a line that, you could hear on a Saturday Night Live skit, and it's just, anyway, it's just fantastic. And another writer who I think does this incredibly well, and not surprisingly, she has a series of books, and humor is just, I believe, a huge part of her appeal, is Diana Gabaldon. A friend of mine recommended her Outlander series to me last year, as I was talking to her about writing this epic romance. She said, well, you've got to read Diana Gabaldon. And so I did. And I'm so glad that I did. And I want to give an example that I think really resonated with me, especially given what I'm writing about in my story. And it is, she used humor in this very horrific point in her story, I think, so effectively and so gracefully. Anyway, in one of her books, I can't remember which one, but her one of her characters is being raped, and isn't just being raped; she's potentially being raped by more than one person. And we are, of course, privy to her interior monologue. You know, the conversation that she's having with herself as this horrific event unfolds. And in this one part, one of her potential rapists actually fails in raping her and fails pretty miserably. And you know, she quips to herself about his sexual incompetence and how lucky it was for her. And she also, you know, makes light to herself of her age, saying that 20 years ago the line would have been a lot longer. So, you know, she's lucky to be an older woman. And it was in no way disrespectful to what was happening. It was actually an incredible way to bring humanity to that situation and to show us how resilient this character was. And it lightened the load for the reader too, because we're very attached to this character. And we can see that even though this horrible thing is happening to her, that she's going to eventually get through it because of her own internal resources. So it actually, I thought, ended up being a far more powerful scene. In fact, I went back and I read it 3 or 4 times. I thought it was, in the end, a far more powerful scene than if she had just written it as a horrific event. And this is something that I'm really struggling. Struggling isn't really the right word, but that I'm working very hard on in this draft, particularly because I'm writing about these very serious issues that I think can exhaust a reader, emotionally exhaust a reader. And you know, that's I certainly hope to take a reader on a really, really intense ride. But I think that that finding where you can inject levity and, in turn, more humanity is crucial to building that trust with the reader and that bond with the reader so that they stick with you. Thank you. This has been really fun, as it always is, and I look forward to next time. I'm really not sure what we're going to be talking about next time. I think it's going to be about the editing process because I am really knee deep in it, and by the time I do this next blog, probably next week, I'm going to be up to my ears in it, and I think that we'll have a lot to talk about.